You see, the thing about 99.9% of people who wind up not alive anymore at the hands of another, well, it turns out usually those people, they're not super cool with that happening to them. But in today's story, no, not only was one of the people we're discussing today, in fact, very super cool with it, there was an extra garnish sprinkled on top, if you will. I guess in the end, maybe there is someone for everyone. Call it a match made in the darkest corner of the internet. The Eaton and the E.T. This is the case of Armin Meiwes, the consensual cannibal. To neighbors, 39-year-old Armin Meiwes was just your friendly neighborhood computer repair guy. Quick to help you troubleshoot an issue, perform repairs on your vehicle, mow your lawn, host dinner parties at his decadent 13th century manor, and enjoyed a good sailing trip with his friends. Described as sensitive and courteous by those who knew him, it would be a long time before anyone knew the lifelong dream that had been smoldering away inside Armin since early adolescence. The story of Armin Meiwes begins right here in this giant, creepy 36-room manor in Wüstefeld, a tiny German hamlet of only about 25 inhabitants at the time. The manor was literally over 700 years old. Its origins could be traced back to the year 1299, with some even saying 900 AD, like, he's crazy. And how did Armin's family come into possession of this? Well, his dad was a cop who made bank and just wanted to buy it. I mean, he didn't really need 16,000 square feet and 36 rooms for just one family. I think he just wanted to be a baller. Although Armin really craved his dad's attention, his dad pretty much just ignored him, was completely disinterested, and Armin spent most of his time with his two older half-brothers from his dad's side. And Armin's mom, well, she was a real treat. She actually gave birth to Armin when she was around 40, and it was a rather strategic pregnancy. She'd been married twice before and was described as a domineering, jealous type person, and when Armin's dad was even a little bit late from work, she would fly off the handle thinking he was cheating and would be like, "If you are, I will end you." And the Armin pregnancy was meant to trap Armin's dad. But despite those issues, Armin described at least his early childhood as lovely, in large part due to his relationship with his two older half-brothers, who he idolized and did everything with. There's their pony Polly. Just a nice, affluent, idyllic life in the German countryside. But very early on, Armin experiences a series of big, sudden losses. Armin's final image of his dad was seeing him slam the door, walk right past him while he was playing in the yard, jump in the car, and drive off into the distance, as Armin literally chased the car down the road. And you guessed it, he never came back. Armin never saw his dad again. If there's anything we could glean from this story, and shout out to my fellas, if you're looking for a reason to stick around, this is it. With no warning, Armin's dad had just abandoned everybody, and it was actually his mother's worst fear. He'd found a younger woman. Then a short while later, both brothers move out to pursue their own lives, and now it was just Armin and Mom in a big empty mansion. Well, you're 8. Time to step up, time to be the man of the house, Armin, and that's how his mom treated him. And she didn't even call him Armin. Some of the time she called him Männchen, which is a girl's name, and would order him around to do literally everything. He just became her servant. "Oh good, you done pruning 16,000 square feet of shrubs, Männchen? Good, now get on your little bike and scoot on down to the market. Oh, you want to wear jeans at school like the cool kids? You gotta wear these lame-ass lederhosen shorts year-round, buddy." From 10 to 12, things had really begun to take shape in the young boy's mind. So lonely, so much sudden loss, he creates an imaginary brother named Franky, a little blonde boy that just made him feel some sense of something again, something nice. And it becomes part of this whole reoccurring theme of having someone never leave him, having someone be with him forever. Also part of this fantasy, he loses himself in books like Hansel and Gretel, particularly enjoying the part where the witch fattens up Hansel so she could eat him. I mean, out in the German countryside, he would also spend hours watching butchers slicing and dicing, preparing meat. He begins to bridge this desire to have someone with him forever with the consumption of people, and I just want to say there's healthier ways to satisfy that need. Just buy a turtle. I know it's no person, but he'll stay with you forever. That's a solid 150 years right there. Anyway, it wasn't long before he was staring at boys in school, fantasized of eating friends, and oh yeah, Franky, he imagined eating him too. Armin Armin knew boys were his main thing, but he also tried to go on dates with girls, but his mom would insist on joining him on all social outings, including dates, which of course ruined the dates. She also never approved of any girls. They weren't good enough for her son. As Armin is making this concerted effort to not veer off the traditional path, his interests are escalating. He got really into the Vampire of Hanover, Fritz Hamann, who claimed the lives of 26 young men and also drank their blood in the 1920s. Around 16, 17, he is heading for a life of being a serial offender. His hormones had kicked in and mixed with these thoughts. Now he imagined abducting and abusing classmates before ultimately consuming them. But by 19, just as he's speeding head-on into this inevitable violent catastrophe, he makes this big decision with his life and decides, I'm gonna join the military. And for the next 12 years, he was a soldier in the West German army, and the fantasies, although still there, are kind of put on the back burner. In part, it apparently did help him stay in line because he was basically getting his fix just being around all the hot guys, all these young, in-shape military men. He did also maintain friendships with women and had a couple girlfriends. There was even a fiance in there somewhere. But of course, they were never up to snuff for mom. As this is all happening, he's actually stationed in Rodenburg right near his house, so he was still living with mom, and she insisted on still accompanying him on all social outings, including outings with the troops. He'd just be having a cold one with his boys at the pub, and then there's Waltraud Meiwes just awkwardly sitting there. By 32, after all this time in the military, his thoughts are still there, and they start to escalate to the point where he turns to the bottle, so much so that he totals his car twice while drunk, effectively ending his career in the military. Just as the mid-90s are underway, two things happen. The World Wide Web takes the world by storm, and Armin becomes infatuated with computers, going full force into a career as a computer tech, eventually getting a pretty good job at a bank. He also did work for people around town on computers. I always just imagined the people who introduced the internet to the world with rose-colored glasses, just like, oh, this is gonna be beautiful. Now everyone can share common interests and connect. Yes, everyone. Armin soon discovers that he is not alone, and he can't believe it. Thousands of websites just dedicated to delving into exactly how to spit roast and barbecue folks like chicken.
Hey, buddy.
The thing is, 99% of it was roleplay, fantasy talk, but nevertheless, it completely takes over Armin's entire life. Now, just as he's beginning to explore his interests, his life is at its best. He's got a great career, everything's going good, but his mom is getting older and he's basically her caretaker at this point. She'd taken a hard fall and been bedridden, and in 1999, his mom passes away from cancer. And that kicks off the downward spiral. Now with his mother gone, Armin could run amok, and amok he did run. I read that he may have gotten generally frisky with a couple army buddies before his mom's passing, but after his mom passes away, he starts hitting up this brothel by the name of the Blue Moon, and you gotta admit, that is a great brothel name. Along with doing some real Ed Gein stuff, making a full-on shrine to his mom complete with a mannequin he'd tuck in at night, he also just had a lot of free space on his hands, 36 rooms, but he only needed one. Using the screen name Franky, adopting the name of his imaginary brother, he began doctoring pictures of men posed in cannibal predicaments. He'd craft pork and marzipan to look human and posted that, boasting that he had actually indeed followed through on the fantasy, which earned him a lot of internet cred among a subset of these people, the ultra freaky deakies, because for most of these people, it was all roleplay fantasy talk. But here Armin was amongst some of the few claiming to have actually walked the walk, but of course he hadn't yet walked the walk, not yet. While Armin's mom was alive, there was this imaginary line he wouldn't cross of acting on his fantasies, but now with his mom gone, he pole vaulted over that line and immediately begins his search for someone to eat. It's probably a much more formal way of wording that last part, but let's move on. He'd begin to construct his slaughter room, complete with a cage, meat hooks hanging from the ceiling, rope, leather, soundproofing, you name it. The year 2000. It was a big year for Armin. He puts out an ad, a feeler, on a forum called the Cannibal Cafe, as well as many other places, looking for a well-built 18 to 25-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed. I mean, just the gall, like there's anyone out there who wants to 204 people. No one actually bit on the ad at first until he raised the age to 30. Then he got some serious traction. And I get that, 18 to 25, you're still trying to figure yourself out. Now, pretty much all the people who responded to the ad were just more into the fantasy part of it. And when they found out that Armin was about that life, they dipped. But that list of 204 people eventually gets narrowed down to a very short list who advance to the preliminary stage of it, talking about it, even meeting Armin in hotel rooms. One guy showed up, was even strapped down to the table and everything, but when Armin was describing what was going to happen, the guy's like, this isn't the best day, I think I'm just gonna head out. Having the person's permission was integral to Armin's little venture, and when someone wanted to bow out, he said, okay, ta-ta, there's the door. Another guy, Matteo from Italy, was down but wanted to be severely beaten by Armin, and Armin said, that's weird. He actually said that and sent the guy on his way. I have standards, thank you very much. But then came someone who made Armin an offer he could not refuse. Now, perhaps an even more perplexing question than how does one arrive at the proclivity to eat another is how does someone want to be on the receiving end of an eating? Meet 43-year-old Bernd Brandes from Berlin. Like Armin, Bernd Brandes had a similarly awful origin story. In 1963, while on family vacation, his mom drives head-on fatally into a tree, and his dad tells 5-year-old Bernd, your mother hit that tree on purpose. Bernd would then go on to blame himself throughout his life, always wondering if there was something he could have done to stop it. His relationship with his dad eventually became distant as well, and when he came out to his dad, that basically buried the relationship. Like, his dad didn't want anything to do with him after that. Now, Bernd, like Armin, actually went on to have a successful career working in computers as a computer software engineer at an executive management type level. But then around 40, he kind of has this midlife crisis. Bernd was interested in both men and women, but he hid his attraction to men from everybody in his life, his co-workers, everything. And when he would get with a woman, have girlfriends, it would usually end because he would confess that he also had feelings for guys. He experiences one of these breakups, and that, accompanied with his fear of aging out, of being attractive, being a hot guy, he decides to dedicate his entire life to fitness, just trains like a maniac. And before long, Bernd was svelte, vascular, the washboard abs. He started flaunting it at work. He blew thousands on a Nigerian catfisher left waiting at an airport for a girl who didn't exist, but eventually he lands a boyfriend, Renee. But unbeknownst to Renee or anyone in his life, Bernd was hitting the brothels and making some peculiar requests to male escorts. You see, Bernd had also been surfing the web and had developed a pretty unique cannibalistic interest that actually began to take shape after his mother's passing around 6 or 7 years old. He wanted someone to bite off it. His desire was to experience the highest degree of degradation and pain humanly possible, so much so that it would end his life, his quote, life's dream. He tried searching for it for years, offered various escorts top dollar, or should I say top Deutschmark, to do it. He told one guy, hey, I'll give you 10 grand and sign you over everything I own if you just do this one thing for me. But of course, that guy and everyone else said, no thank you. With this unsuccessful effort, Bernd turns to the internet forums and puts out a feeler of his own. The subject line to the ad simply read, dinner or your dinner, which is pretty good. That's, if you're into this stuff, I mean, that's a good tagline. Then says, I offer myself to you and will let you dine from my living body. That's when Brandes, who went by Cater99, crosses paths with Armin, now going by Antrophagus. Bernd actually lied to Armin, told him he was 36 even though he's 43. I will say it was first reported that the two met on the Cannibal Cafe forum, but they actually met on just some run-of-the-mill Yahoo cannibal club. Anyway, Bernd told Meiwes things like, my nipples look forward to your stomach. What a sentence. I mean, I don't think you'll hear that one again, hopefully. Bernd also suggested that his skull could be used as an ashtray. I mean, there's so much more. They basically talked about the logistics, exactly how this would go down, and Armin had even expressed like some concern over whether it was even possible to perform the bite. But anyway, the other main ingredient of Bernd's big dream was after the amputation was performed, the two would sit down for a joint feasting of the item. Armin agrees to honor that fantasy, and Bernd didn't really care what happened after that. Bernd simply knew that Armin planned on, quote, carving him up and consuming him in full. Bernd wiped his entire digital trail, the chat logs, auctions off all of his major belongings including a sports car, makes out a written will to his boyfriend Renee, and purchases a one-way ticket in cash from Berlin to the Castle train station just outside Rodenburg, where Armin meets him, and then the two toddle off to the mansion. They get there, they actually sit down for coffee first, which seems appropriate. Really, the bare minimum prelude. While Armin goes to fetch the coffee, Bernd sneakily slips out of his clothes, and when Armin comes back in the room, he says, "I just want you to admire your dinner." Armin then gives Bernd a tour of the room where it was all going to happen, and then they go off to the bedroom and have just your run-of-the-mill intimate encounter, but Bernd was left deeply unsatisfied with this encounter. That's right, the Rodenburg cannibal was rotin in the bedroom, but it was really the fact that Armin was just jovial and kind of joking throughout, and Bernd was like, you're not up to this, you're a silly goose, I mean, you can't go through this. As discussed in the chats, Brandes had also consumed some cough syrup, but after an hour he still had yet to feel it kick in at all and decides that he wants to go home, gets cold feet, drive me back to the station. Armin says okie dokie, they drive off, but Brandes never boards that train. He'd changed his mind. They decide to stop for more cough syrup, but also sleeping pills and schnapps. They get home and begin. I just want to say before we get into this part, there's the door. This is where it really gets bad. As discussed in the online chats, and something Brandes was adamant on, is a camera would be rolling. After what would be done to him, Brandes wanted to catch the instant replay in whatever time he had left. Brandes then pounded back the cough syrup, schnapps, and 20 sleeping pills. Armin presses the play button and begins to reiterate over and over again, "This is something you want, Bernd? Yes?" And Bernd is like, "Yes, now do it." Armin attempts to perform the bite, but it doesn't work. He then goes to grab a knife from the kitchen. Too dull. That doesn't work. Then he grabs a sharper knife from the kitchen. That works. Which was followed by the area leaking like a fountain, according to Armin, and a very short but very intense scream from Brandes. But after 20 or 30 seconds, Brandes turns to Armin and said, "I don't feel it anymore." The two then attempt to consume it, but it was too tough. Chewy was the word that Armin actually used, and that left Brandes a little bit sad. Armin then goes to fry it with a little garlic and red wine, but he burnt Bernd's thing to a crisp. Not only was Bernd bent out of shape because it was inedible, but just he expected it to be so much more, like literally the physical sight of it. Just seeing the shriveled, charred thing left him feeling blue. In the end, Armin just tosses it to his dog. Now, turns out just buying a whack of over-the-counter medication in the hopes that Brandes would just peacefully pass from the open wound, well, that didn't happen. Bernd was still conscious and cold and asks Armin to prepare him a warm bath so he could essentially bleed out in peace. With Bernd in the bath, Armin's like, okay, I'm just gonna give you your time. He leaves, goes to another room, and starts reading a Star Trek novel, just waiting for Bernd to succumb to his injury, which he believed was probably gonna be soon. Well, let me tell you, although Bernd was definitely not prospering, he was living long. As the hours ticked, Armin would check on Bernd every 15 minutes or so, and each time he checked, Bernd was still breathing. And hours pass as he's doing these periodic checks on Bernd, and as messed up and disturbing as it all is, that had to also just be awkward as hell. Oh, still kicking. Alrighty then. One of these checks, Bernd says, if I'm still alive in the morning, we'll have eggs for breakfast. Eventually, Armin hears a rumble. Bernd had gotten out of the tub, fallen unconscious, and then woken up again. This happened a couple times. Eventually, Armin just drags him to the slaughter room, lays him on the bed where Bernd is again just drifting in and out of consciousness. After going back and forth on what he wanted to do next, and Bernd uttering his final words, "I have to pee," before passing out again, Armin then leans in for one final kiss and then takes the knife to Bernd's throat. 17 hours after they'd first met, Bernd Brandes was no more, but now this was everything to Armin. In his mind, what had taken place, Bernd's big dream was to him, quote, rather unpleasant and disgusting, and had fallen short of both of their expectations. They expected it to be a much more romantic evening. Instead, it was just this long, awkward, grotesque shit show. But it was now time for Armin's life's dream. He immediately suspends Bernd from one of the ceiling hooks and begins removing and storing sections in his freezer. He also stored Brandes' skull and other things in his backyard in a section he referred to as the graveyard that he would visit and play Italian music for some reason. But he sets aside one section, a portion for immediate consumption, a quote rump steak. The table was laid out, mom's candles, elegant dinnerware, a glass of South African red wine. The steak would be sauteed with salt, pepper, garlic, nutmeg, and accompanied by princess croquettes, Brussels sprouts, and green pepper sauce. It tasted of pork, but stronger, he said. He claimed to finally achieve this deeper connection that he'd been searching for his entire life. Plus, Brandes apparently spoke really good English, and Armin claimed that his own English improved remarkably after this, so I guess eating somebody is just like a crash course in Duolingo. 10 months had passed, and your friendly neighborhood computer guy was just out there living his best life. Throughout the year, he'd continued to thaw portions of leftovers to prepare fashionable dishes. He also made mincemeat for meatballs. He didn't do it every day. It was more like a delicacy. He would lay the table with all of his mom's best dinnerware, and, it was a special thing for him. In total, he'd consumed about 44 pounds of Brandes over the span of 10 months, but he was still hungry for more. However, the gravy train was about to come to a screeching halt. Franky had gone quiet on those internet forums for a number of months, but eventually Armin logs back in and gets right to bragging it up. I'm the real deal, like really this time. He even shared screenshots of what he did to Brandes. He was back looking for his next willing dinner, but Brandes proved to be somewhat of a delicacy because no one else dared to step up to the plate. And in the end, it was this brazen search for a new person that led to Armin's downfall. On July 8, 2002, Armin begins chatting it up with this Austrian medical student, and they carry on a conversation, and Armin's thinking to himself, oh my god, could it be willing dinner? Well, not quite. Once this 23-year-old student realized that Franky was the real deal, he was horrified and he went straight to the police. Now, police first knock on Armin's door in November of 2002 and find the meat in his freezer hidden in the most inconspicuous of spots under a couple pizza boxes. He told them it was pork, and they actually initially let Armin go because tests hadn't come back on the meat yet, and somehow they just didn't find enough to hold him. But once those tests come back and they have enough, they go back to his house in December. Now, here's the thing about Armin. He really didn't believe he'd done anything wrong. So despite the initial lie of it being pork, this time Armin was forthcoming and knew that the game was up. A female officer asked him something along the lines of, have you eaten someone? And he said, I might have. What a cheeky response. Police also hadn't recovered the 4-hour tape that Armin and Brandes had made on Search 1, but this time Armin leads them right to it. Only 19 minutes of which could be played in court due to how messed up it was. It caused several jurors to seek therapy because, of course, the trial is where this whole thing takes another twist. Turns out at the time there wasn't a great deal legally in place to make this an open and shut case. After all, Bernd Brandes had signed his life and consumption over to Armin, and it was argued in court that this was just a friendly mutual exchange between a couple of fellas. Also brought up was the people Armin turned away, and those people turned up to court to testify, yeah, when I didn't want to participate anymore, Armin just let me go without issue. Of course, the other wrench thrown into the mix, cannibalism wasn't technically illegal in Germany.
Quite the conundrum.
Bernd came to me on his own free will to end his life. For him, it was a nice death. I had my big kick, and I don't need to do it again. I regret it all very much, but I can't undo it. After that closing statement, the court came back with a sentence of 8.5 years for manslaughter. But it doesn't stick. The following year, his sentence gets appealed. He goes back on trial, and this time there was an emphasis on the arousal factor. The fact that he admitted watching the 4-hour tape several times accompanied by self-massage. He'd done it for satisfaction, which obviously brought to question the possibility of reoffending. On top of that, they questioned why Armin didn't question Brandes as a person, his motives. Obviously, something has to be super awry upstairs for you to want to have something like this done to you. you. And with that, the court came back with life, but with the chance of parole. Now, the million-dollar question, how wrong was it? Well, it was very wrong, just plainly. For me, the even bigger thing than Armin getting gratification out of it was Bernd Brandes had to have some serious issues. Bernd's dad and others had testified he was depression and mental illness free, but call me crazy, anyone who wants something like this done to them is just not of sound mind. And hypothetically, even if something like this was totally legal, you know, you shake on it, you sign some kind of cannibal contract, you pinky swear, people shouldn't do this. It's just not the best thing to do. Very interesting with the similarities between Armin and Brandes' upbringing, although they weren't the same, you know, the high degree of loneliness, the absent parents, but then them ending up on opposite ends of the cannibal spectrum. I wonder if Brandes, it was that he felt ashamed of his orientation, you know, the way his dad just cut him out of his life. That might have been why he wanted to, you know, just get rid of it. I mean, I'm grasping at straws here, I don't know. Parallels to the two Eds as well, Ed Kemper and Ed Gein, you know, with the domineering mother, and especially in the Ed Gein case, the reverence that Armin had for his mom. Of course, Gein took the shrine thing a lot further than Armin. And you know, this whole notion of wanting somebody to stay with you forever seems to be a thing that continuously comes up in these cannibal cases. And again, I say just get a turtle. It can't hurt. It can't hurt. Lots of interesting updates, some of them recent in this case. For one, Armin is now a vegetarian. Also, since 2020, Armin has been allowed day trips outside of prison, walking around town with supervision, of course. His disguise, a pair of sunglasses and a baseball cap. The only thing missing is a dollar store mustache, for Christ's sake. Then in 2023, this is just a couple years back, the Meiwes Manor was set ablaze, burned to the ground by a couple of arsonists. But I don't know, it's interesting. They could be gearing up to eventually free Armin, and whether he will reoffend, I don't know. Definitely a risk there. He does claim that he's cured. Apparently websites dedicated to him were popping up after he went to prison, and when he was asked about that behind bars, he said that those people should seek therapy so that it doesn't escalate like it did with me. Even up until recently, there was a whole network of people busted, a whole website with 22,000 members of people donating limbs. Like, it's crazy. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. And, you know, like I always say, it really just helps if you just click it all. Like, just have a real click frenzy. I'm telling you right now, if you don't click it all, I'm not going to do anything, but, you know, I'd be sad, but I really just would appreciate if you would. Thank you.
And until next time, ta-ta for now.